Right, I've unmuted myself. Hopefully you can all hear me. And I would like to welcome you all back after a very brief break to the next session of the conference. I'm very pleased to be able to invite our next guest, who I was just trying to remember what his job title, or trying to remind myself what his job title is, and I was thinking, actually, Peter was just always on speed dial for me. I didn't need to know what his job title was because he used to get probably more phone calls than he ever wanted. But I'd like to introduce Peter van Nauw, who is the Senior Director for Systems and Payment at Dover Fueling Solutions. And I know many of you will know Peter, and he's one of our technical associates representatives. And I would like to now ask him to talk to us about the consumer experience, and this from a supplier perspective. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Heather, for that kind introduction. And your number is still on my speed dial, so if you need it, you can still find me. So thank you for that introduction. Thank you also to the IFSF for allowing me to speak here. It is a great pleasure, even though, of course, like many people, I would have preferred that it would be face-to-face. But okay, here we are. So topic of my speech today is to talk about driving consumer experience and how we as a supplier look into that. But before we go there, first a little bit about Dover Fueling Solutions. I won't spend too much time on this. So Dover Fueling Solutions is part of Dover Corp, and basically was created in 2017, first after the acquisition of Tokheim in 2016, and then the acquisition of Wayne in 2017. And that meant bringing, in fact, 6 companies and 6 cultures together, because next to Tokheim and Wayne, we also had Clearview, Fairbanks, OPW, and ProGauge joining the family. And DFS is basically created to provide end-to-end solutions in the fuel retail industry. So starting from fuel dispensing equipment, electronic systems and payment, fleet systems, ATG, and wet stock management solutions, we are 100% focused on the fuel retail industry. But when you bring 6 companies together like that, you're also bringing 6 cultures together. Cultures that could come from different parts of the world, but also cultures that are coming from a different background in designing products, solutions, and processes. So bringing all of that together requires basically to redefine your corporate culture, which is what we did. And we really took our time to do that because we see it as a critical element of our company and our culture. And so based on that culture, we defined our values, our vision, and our mission. And it's actually interesting because what we're talking about today is basically the core of our mission, and especially the core of our vision. So our mission is to provide these customer-focused technologies, services, and solutions to the fuel retail industry. But our vision is to do that in light of what the consumer wants to experience. So it's all about enabling that evolution of consumer experience, because that is the only way to win in this business and to win together with our customers. I'm gonna bring you a couple of examples of how we look at the changing consumer experience and the effects that that has on our products and on our solutions. And I want to start us off with COVID-19. It's almost inevitable. And like Greg before me, I have a blue line here and I have a red line. The blue line is actually showing the transactions that were going through our Oase payment gateway in 2019 on a monthly basis. And in 2019, we had approximately 670 million transactions. And then the red line shows what happened in 2020, which was basically a year where we would expect a growth between 5 and optimistically 10% by bringing on new sites to the system. But what actually happened was that the first 2 months were pretty okay. So we had that 5% growth that we were expecting to see. And then, of course, COVID-19 kicked in. The first wave came, the lockdown started. And instead of our transactions rising, we saw a huge decline from an expected 60 million to even below 40 million transactions. We were actually back to the volume that we had 5 years ago. So we saw an immediate effect of how consumers looked at the impact of COVID-19 and the change in behavior. But very quickly, there was a recovery. So the governments let go of the strict lockdown requirements, and basically Europe went on vacation. So we saw a very strong recovery, with July and August having the highest numbers we had ever seen in terms of transactions. So that was pretty interesting to see. And of course, what you can imagine happened next is that we were into a second wave. Now, was Europe on vacation the reason for that? Well, at least it was partly the reason. But what you see now is that the dip is not as high as we had in the first wave. It's going to be a little bit less impactful because people have changed their habits. And yes, there will be less fuel required because of the work from home. But on the other hand, there's also people that have moved from other areas of transport back to the car for safety reasons. And what we are doing in that case, so this is some statistics that you can see from the first wave, and I hope it's pretty small, but that you can read the different countries. So these are week by week transaction statistics in different countries. And these statistics are actually quite interesting for us because there are many countries out there where there is a huge part of the transactions going through our transaction gateway. And that allows us to see basically what's happening in these markets in terms of economic activity. And what you see really here is that for some countries where the lockdown was very severe and where the impact of COVID-19 was pretty high, countries like France, but also Spain, Italy, and Belgium, by the way, that the dip was actually very much more significant than it was in other countries. The duration was also longer, and the timing of recovery was more important as well. Other countries like the Netherlands, who didn't really have a lockdown, Germany, who was less impacted by the first wave, and also the Scandinavian countries who had a different way of approaching it. There you see that the dip is much less and that the recovery was also much quicker. And then came the real surprises where countries where you would expect to go back to normal behavior actually exceeded that. And that was the shift we saw from public transport and air travel to more car travel. And especially in Norway, this was very exceptional because we went to 140% of the expected transaction load. And it was interesting to see how the consumer behavior adapted to a crisis like this. But also in other countries, not just in Scandinavia, but also in other countries, we went actually to a higher number of transactions than before the COVID crisis. But there's other impact as well. So what we saw during the first wave of the COVID crisis was that the average transaction amount reduced, but that there was a shift from fuel sales to non-fuel retail sales, so basically convenience products. And this is where we saw that there was confidence of the public to go to these C-stores to actually get their groceries because it felt probably a lot more safe than going into crowded supermarkets. But the most impressive part was the evolution of the contactless transactions. So when you look back to January 2020, we had approximately 15% of transactions being contactless. And when you look at October now, we're at 32% of all transactions processed through our server being contactless. So that's more than double. And one of the main reasons that this happened, I assume, is that in March, April, the contactless limit increased as the governments saw an opportunity there to fight COVID-19 by increasing the number of contactless transactions and contactless interactions with the consumer. So we had to implement that on approximately 7,000 sites in just over 2 weeks, but the impact of that was very much visible. And if you now compare the Netherlands, for instance, which is one of the countries very much evolved in terms of contactless transactions, they are currently at 69% overall. So all of the financial transactions taking place on retail sites, on parking sites, etc., amounts to 69%. If you look at the contactless transactions on the fuel retail side, it's currently 43%. So still some way to go, but again, it's already an impressive part. Now, what is missing is NFC transactions on outdoor contactless. At the moment, we only have 0.9% of transactions, which is still 470,000 transactions in October, but only 0.9% of transactions is outdoor contactless. Reasons for that, of course, yeah, the nature of outdoor payment is different because you have pre-authorization, so it's a little bit different. There's the use of the mobile phone, which is still, yeah, is it allowed? It's not allowed, not officially. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. Wearables can be an interesting part. And normally now there should be a film starting, which, yeah, there we go. So you see a little clip there of, this is a live transaction of an Apple Pay. So an Apple Pay transaction using an Apple Watch. So which basically shows that these transactions work on site, but there's still too few of them. Now what is happening is MasterCard has, of course, its mandates, and we are now expecting a mass deployment of outdoor contactless happening during 2021. So that will then, of course, bring up the number of outdoor contactless transactions and the overall number of contactless transactions. The consumer journey is transforming. These are some statistics that I gathered from the National Retail Industry Association or something like that. So they are focused on the standard retail industry. It's all about easy, fast convenience in fuel retail shopping. Consumers are expecting that to happen. And I think also Stephen Van Belleghem in his talk on Tuesday made that very much clear. So you need to address those consumer needs. Now, 33% of shoppers leave the store without buying if lines are longer than 7 minutes. I am one of them. 50% of shoppers avoid stores with long lines. Again, count me in. 73% of shoppers prefer self-service technologies. And I think as an industry, we haven't done that bad because I think maybe 30, 40 years ago already, the use of self-service with outdoor payments in the fuel retail industry became much of a standard. But how can we improve on that? And 88% of shoppers are likely to buy if helped by a knowledgeable sales associate. So that's all about creating that personal experience with the user. But I want to talk about these self-service technologies and how that evolves, and talk about self-checkout also in the fuel retail segment. So what you need is happy customers. Yeah? Queuing is a frustration, so you want to avoid queuing as much as possible. So consumers should have the ability to scan, pay, and get on with their day. As a retailer, you can use your staff in a better way. So you can lower your operational costs because a single employee can basically supervise multiple self-checkout kiosks. Speed and simplicity. We want to get those people quickly in and out and making their purchases. So self-checkout can be ideally suited to the fuel retail sector. And also it's a small footprint. So you can put these self-checkout kiosks in a relatively small area, taking up less space, as also space is money. But ultimately it's about the user. So it's very important to configure your store in such a way that you create the ideal consumer experience. And that can be different for different types of retail sites. So you see here some examples of where self-checkout kiosks have been installed in different constellations. On the left side, you see an example, which is a Q8, by the way, where it's really put in such a way that the customer moves automatically in that direction so that they automatically go to the self-checkout kiosk instead of going to the demand till. On the middle one, which is an interesting one because that was one of the first pilots we have done following a co-creation project with Shell, is here you see that the self-checkout till can be changed from a normal point of sale into a self-checkout point of sale in just a matter of seconds. And that is due to how busy it is, or when they are selling sandwiches during lunchtime, they can actually change the configuration of the shop. On the right side, it's a much bigger shop where you really have a self-checkout island. So also here, it's about recognizing what the consumer experience is, recognizing what your store looks like, and then finding the ideal configuration and setting it up like that. But even when you do that, once you get started, it's never the end because the consumer is changing. The consumer wants the right experience and you have to adapt to that experience. So it's an agile way of working and you bring new experiences, new improvements for the user. And what you see on the left side is that one of the issues we saw was that, hey, that user needs to be monitored from a distance by the staff. So how can you do that? Or how can you show to the user that the kiosk is operational? Well, we put in a LED bar and that LED bar then shows what's happening on site. So easy for a consumer to know, hey, I can go there, but also easy for an attendant to know if there's an issue and if a consumer needs support. But also there are new payment methods coming in, and you see a small clip here on the right side where consumers want less touch, which is a bit weird, of course, because they're looking at a touchscreen. But in terms of payment, they want to support mobile payments. And so you see that you have to add new methods of payment, like in this case, adding the Payconic contactless payment, or the Payconic mobile payment, which is quite popular in the Benelux area. And people were expecting that also payments can happen that way. But they're also expecting that payments can still be done in cash. So your self-checkout should be connected to cash machines. So it's a journey that you're on, and it's not by bringing a new product to market that it's finished, because the consumer will decide when it's finished, and the consumer will decide how it needs to evolve. So feedback is critical. Another challenge we faced with the self-checkout was, how do you do fuel sales? Because you're now going to let the consumer select their own filling and perform a fuel sale. So of course it's easy to select your dispenser, but how do you know it's really yours once you get into the store? So what we designed was actually an interaction, an interface that we have with CCTV suppliers that allowed us to bring these images visible to a consumer. So the consumer can basically pick their own car, sometimes even there's their own cells on the picture. Of course, in line with GDPR requirements, because you have to be careful with that. But it's much easier to pick your car than it is to pick your filling out of a lineup of maybe 4 or 5 fillings. So that was then the key to also allow fuel sales in a safe and convenient way to be selected by the consumer. Not everybody wants it, so it is an option. So whether or not you sell fuel, if you sell fuel, it has to be done in the right way. EV chargers, also yesterday we heard about that. It's unavoidable. There are increasing sales volumes of these hybrids, plug-in hybrids, full battery operated electric vehicles. Here you see a statistic moving from 8% in 2019 to 18% of new car registrations, of course. So it is growing, and as an industry, we need to take into account that it is there. And the consumers, they actually expect the same level of convenience as they do for the standard cars, the internal combustion engine vehicles. So how do you manage that? Well, I think most of the fuel retailers out there, they are working on it, and they are being installed on fuel retail sites. But you need to have sufficient capacity and have that capacity available on these fuel retail sites, because what you want to avoid is queuing also on these EV chargers. But also you want to integrate EV transactions into the overall consumer value proposition. So why would a consumer that is using an electric vehicle not benefit from everything you have on site, from the methods of payment you have on site, the tariff that you can make visible to them, the loyalty programs that you can have this consumer follow when they come onto your sites also for an EV. And the way to do that is, of course, to integrate the EV chargers as part of your site infrastructure. And there the OCPP standard protocol, so the industry standard OCPP protocol of EV chargers comes in. And what we have done is we've actually integrated at the moment around 4 or 5 different EV charger suppliers into our point of sale system using the OCPP standard, which pretty much suffers a little bit from the same pain as IFSF does in some of its standards, is that the implementation of the standard is sometimes a little bit different and then requires some tweaking in order to get it right. But still, once you get it right, it allows you to configure the tariff structure in a clear way. And John, we are using OCPP 1.6, as I just see your question coming in. It shows a detailed tariff on the customer receipts. It provides actually access to all of the payments that you have on site. You can then combine it with your loyalty systems, combine it with your NFR sales, and integrate it also into the OPT for outdoor payments and unattended sales. You see here a screen with a buildup of the entire tariff structure, which could be comprised of multiple elements, like a charging fee on kilowatt hours. You can have discounts related to non-weights and measurements effects. There's a starting fee, a parking fee. So lots of possibilities to create that tariff. And now we know that MasterCard and Visa have embodied the 5552 MCC code, which basically means that we now also have for card payment transactions a specific merchant category code allowing for the specifics of the EV charging. So also on outdoor payment, it now becomes fairly straightforward to allow EV charging in the same way as we have with dispensers. But only here what you see is you're selecting an EV charger, you're selecting the type of connector, because there could be different connectors on the same EV charger. And then you get a full overview of the tariff structure before moving forward with your charging. And at the end, you get a nice ticket with all of the details. And for the fuel retailer, it all comes back through the back office, head office interface nicely into the ERP systems for handling the data. And it's actually in real life also like that. So you see here an example of an Italian site with a supermarket co-op, which has a standard fuel site next to its supermarket, but also now the EV chargers, and everything is nicely integrated into their site system. But there's also an example, for instance, and that was a surprise to me, is that we're really putting these devices into sometimes called an EV farm. So basically it's a parking lot linked to a fuel retail site where there's up to 30 different EV chargers, all being controlled from inside the shop or through outdoor payment methods. And the reason behind that of these customers was really then we have our own fuel cards. We want to have these customers also using their bank cards and connected to our loyalty system. And that was the way to do it. Mobile payment solutions, abundantly available. As a supplier, we have actually changed our strategy over the last 6 years because first in 2014, we started to develop the first mobile payment applications. Here we are 6 years on and we're still developing mobile payment applications. Many players out there, also all of the large oil companies are having their own solutions. From an end-to-end approach that we had initially, we actually went back into having a standardized interface into our site system in order to have multiple MPPAs, so the mobile payment applications use actually the infrastructure that we have on site. And it's all based on standards, whether those are APIs or whether we are using the IFSF mobile standard, both are available and there are different implementations out there. But again, we have about 12 available today. None of them are really the same. They're all a little bit different. And when you look at the consumer experience, there's a lot to be talking about here. So the enrollment process is critical. If you don't get that right, you will not have success. And we have seen successes and we have seen failures with these mobile payment solutions. The user experience is key. It has to be convenient. It has to be frictionless. It has to be better than what we're used to with card payments. The available method of payments must be right as well. We saw a solution where there was an app-in-app requirement to do the payment. That just took way too long and consumers were not accepting it. Critical is to have loyalty and promotions embedded into it. Fuel discounts, rewards, vouchers. We saw a customer starting off with a fuel discount for 1 month and then taking it back to get customers signed up. Well, the first month was a huge success. After the second month, it really went downhill. So you need to keep that loyalty and promotion part up and running. Integration with a vehicle is important. And I think I should say it was just fill and go, which was the example that was given by Stephen on Tuesday. Very important if you can get it better than that. C-store integration from your mobile payment experience. Integrated with coffee machines, car washes, restrooms, vending halls, why not? But the real key, I think, will come with pre-order solutions, pick and collect, because consumers want to have this ultimate experience. Pre-ordering when they're on their way, and once they get there, just pick it all up and go again. Consumer feedback is critical in this part of the business. Some statistics, at the moment we have 2,300 mobile payment sites where we know that mobile payment is enabled using IFSF or an API. 12 connections are out there, but we also have payment authorization happening for fuel cards, which have been put into a mobile payment solution. So we do see a lot of different experiences with mobile payment, some of them quite successful, others having a bit more challenges. Standards and APIs for us as a supplier are important, but how does that work in real life? It's not always that easy. So if we start from, let's say, a point of sale system with a forecourt controller, and we look at the forecourt itself, and I'm probably not even putting everything up here. You see the fuel dispensers, the EV chargers, outdoor payment, price signs, tank level gauges, car washes, CCTV, media screens, and possibly there's a lot more that can be connected on the forecourt. Same thing in the C-store. So next to the standard till, you can have self-checkout, you have indoor payment, you have vending walls, there's cash machines to integrate into. There could be a lot of fiscal solutions linked to the site system, fiscal printers or other black boxes, white boxes, whatever they are called. But there's also a link with coffee machines, with restrooms, everything you can imagine. Somehow you want to connect it into that site system. But it gets even more interesting when we're going offsite, and a lot of these have an equivalent offsite when they have an equivalent on the forecourt or on the C-store. Going to fiscal hosts, road tolling, head office of the retail company, with asset management, fuel pricing, payments, a very important part of the offsite infrastructure. So from a payment gateway, you can go to bank acquirers, to fuel card issuers and acquirers. Loyalty, e-voucher, mobile payment, wet stock services, media, charge point operators. And that was actually the only room I had on the slide, because I could put in a lot more of these offsite components where you need to interface to. And this is where the standards become critical. And I'm pointing out here, so IFSF, we've always, as DFS and before that as Stockheim or Wayne, been a strong advocate of IFSF, and where we can and where it makes sense, we are implementing IFSF standards. And I think where it becomes most visible is in the payment part. So we have 12 IFSF interfaces with bank acquirers. That still means that 8 of those are non-bank. We have 81 IFSF interfaces with fuel card issuers and acquirers, but also IFSF interfaces with loyalty and e-voucher and mobile payment. So a lot of IFSF is out there. Now also OCPP comes in. So with the integration of the EV chargers and a link to the charge point operators, you have the OCPP standard coming in. And then you have all these APIs coming in, because all of these devices, all of these interfaces somehow are moving to API. Now, what we're missing as a supplier also is the standardization part, because we are confronted with developing each and every time different APIs depending on the product or depending on the interface that we're working towards. And that is where standardization can become a very strong value proposition. But lots of APIs out there. But equally important is what you're doing with that data. And this is what Greg alluded to in his presentation. Is all about. He wants to have the data, and then he can use that data to manage his sites, to manage his infrastructure. And there's lots of data available in the site systems. We are getting it out. We're bringing it into a data lake. We're running Power BI on that data lake. And that actually helps us to tracking that customer journey and ultimately improving the consumer experience. That data can be taken out by standard interfaces like Greg and Certas are using today, but also more and more we're delivering APIs to get that data in more real time out of that system. So this is just a snapshot of the complexity that you have on a fuel retail site and how standards and APIs play an important role in managing that. Next, I want to talk, let's see about time. Okay, I need to speed up. So digital transformation. So Stephen in his speech talked a lot about there was more digital transformation in the last 2 months than ever before. And of course, that is very good news for companies like Microsoft or Azure, who are providing systems and platforms for that. But also we as DFS have embarked on a digital transformation. And in doing that, we've looked at digital accelerators. And one of those is the platform. So we have chosen to work with Microsoft Azure, and we have a global partnership with Microsoft to do that. But a critical part is basically the customer itself, the consumer. So voice of customer surveys and getting feedback from those consumers and your customers is the most critical element in defining your digital adventure. And of course, then you need to complement that with agile execution. And yes, you can have artificial intelligence and machine learning associated with that. You need to think about a new way of digital sales, because the products that you're bringing here are not sold in the classical way. And of course, then you need to market them differently. Also, your technical support is different than it was in the standard world. The go-to-market is a different approach that you need to take. But the real critical element is getting it right with your consumers and doing the one-on-ones, getting the surveys in, and then actually using that to leverage your new functionality. Some market drivers on that changing consumer expectation. So the consumer expects to be customized, a customized user experience. Recognize me, remember what I like, speak my language. For us, that's an opportunity to actually build that consumer trust and loyalty. Also build the experience in an intuitive way, connect it to my devices, whether that's a phone, whether that's a car, whether that's a wearable, and create a frictionless shopping and checkout. And that leads to an increased throughput on site. Promotional offers, the customer expects a deal, give me a deal, which ultimately would lead to the concept that Stephen talked about, is that offer you cannot refuse. But for us as an industry, that provides incremental revenue and margins, upselling, cross-selling activities, and really create of that fuel retail site a place of convenience. So we have embarked on our own system, so the DFS Cloud powered by Microsoft Azure. So that's not just the cloud, it's also looking at the different IoT connected devices on site and how you bring that back to a central location. And for that, we're using intelligent computing at the edge. So whatever we have in terms of devices on site, whether that is a forecourt controller, the point of sale, or a separate edge device, it's all about collecting that data and bringing that data to a central repository. But it's not just up to DFS to do that. So what we want to build is an ecosystem, bringing in different parties. And yes, we are building our own DFS DX building blocks with different applications, but that's not enough. You need to complement that with customer applications, with our partner applications, third-party apps being either available on the site infrastructure or within the cloud. And the way we do that is by exposing a set of APIs, basically having a specific API management that allows us to interface with these third-party clouds. So we get into a cloud-to-cloud application, or we're building customer-specific applications using APIs within that cloud. And ultimately, the vision is to end up with a digitally connected fuel retail site where everything is connected, where all the data is available, and where ultimately the data is used to improve the consumer experience. Lots of elements here, whether you're in the shop itself, whether you're on the forecourt, whether you use the car wash or anything else that is related to a retail site system. Everything is being monitored, and based on that data, you move forward. Final example of a user experience is that I'm showing you the DFS Anthem here. Now I want to just issue a little bit of a warning because this is a product that we have launched for the North American market. It is today not available in Europe, and it will definitely come to Europe as a platform, not in the same way, but as a platform. We do see that in Europe this will come as well, but I will give you the example here of how we're doing that in the North American market. Now it looks like a dispenser, and in fact it is a dispenser, but more than that, this is a user experience platform. When looking at this dispenser with its platform, we're looking at increasing the screen size. So what we used to have was like a 5-inch screen, and now we're bringing that to a 27-inch screen to enhance the user experience and provide a branding opportunity and more interactiveness with the consumer. All doing that through touchscreens, of course, with the necessary connectivity requirements, Bluetooth and Wi-Fi being enabled, but also mobile apps being enabled on the platform. Biometrics and NFC payments are playing an important role in the overall consumer experience. And what Anthem does, it's actually providing an intuitive user interface, providing convenience to the user. And basically, we talked also on Tuesday about, filling up is no fun. Well, we're trying here to make it fun. So the consumer gets a whole new experience of using a dispenser and adding a lot of, let's say, functional enhancements to that dispensing experience, making it faster, simpler, relevant, and fun. And what you see here also is one difference between the North American market and the European market, which is these push buttons to select the fuel grade. So we typically have multiple nozzles, while in North America you have one nozzle with multiple push buttons. So these push buttons are now electronically available on the screen, making it easier for a consumer to use it. And then Anthem knows you. So with Anthem, like I said, it's a platform. Also comes a portal where a consumer can register himself or herself, basically opting in to getting those specific requirements for a personalized greeting, but also for things like, do you want to have a receipt sent to your email? What is your preferred fuel? What is your preferred language? And also, what is your preferred media in using that? So you log in, you put in your preferences, and then each time you use an Anthem dispenser, automatically the dispenser recognizes you, and then you can do your filling. Now, all that is linked again through APIs with loyalty programs of our customers to make sure that it's all nicely embedded. Anthem entertains. So while you're filling up, you get to see your preferred choice of media platform. So that could be the news, could be the weather, the traffic, but also could be sports or actually playing a game. So all of that is possible through that user interaction model and allows you to create a fun experience of filling up. Anthem promotes. So as a retailer, you can actually use those screens to promote, to cross-sell, to upsell, to bring the consumer into your store. Or as you can see here, you see a QR code being put on the screen. And that QR code actually brings the customer into the signing up of a loyalty program. So all of that is possible, and you can change that over time. But basically, what we're doing here is, so we're looking at digitalization. We're looking at how is a consumer looking at digitalization, how can a consumer can benefit from that. And that is when you start designing new solutions. And this is basically what we're there for as a supplier, is to support the retail industry, the fuel retail industry, and designing these new solutions and coming up with the right solutions that consumers will want to take and want to use. And that is basically where my speech ends. So what we're looking at is, how do we create from this fuel retail site, which is going through a lot of changes in fuel, and the way people fuel, changes in how consumers look at a fuel retail site. And it's all about trying to find the right solutions that work and turning the fuel retail site into a place of convenience. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Again, I give you my little clap because no one else is there to clap you. So I have some questions for you. I'm afraid your torture is not yet quite finished. So a question from Nick Allen is, Peter, you mentioned challenges faced with mobile payment solutions. What are the key challenges that you are seeing?
Well, it's not about technology. I think we've all covered that. We have the interfaces, we have everything that we need. So I think the key challenge is in the app itself and how you design the app, how you have people sign up, the different payment methods that you bring to life, because in every country in Europe, it's still pretty much different. So the way you're going to pay in Norway is not the same way as you pay in Belgium. Yes, there are some things that are perhaps similar, but you need to get those different means of payment in there. You need to connect loyalty to it. You need to connect vouchers to it. You need to constantly address your consumer with it. And that is a tough job, and you need to keep it interesting. And I've seen some very good examples, very nice ones, where I do see that the oil company is investing heavily and bringing constantly new additions to it, new value propositions to customer. And that is the way to do it. Just making sure that you can pay mobile is not going to do it anymore. It needs to be a lot more than that, a whole new experience.
Okay, right. Then a question from Francois, which is, how do you get organized to make agile execution?
A difficult question. Well, actually, there's a story on that, there's a difference if you're in my position or if you're in an engineering position and you want to work agile. We actually have to thank Shell, and I hope I'm not saying anything wrong here, but Shell for that, because they pushed us in a certain direction of working more agile, because that fit also with their culture and their way of working. And we had actually adapted quite quickly to it. Yes, we still have release management. Yes, we still need to be careful. Yes, everything has to we have 24/7 engagement to have uptimes with our systems. But working in an agile way has learned us a lot about how to handle consumer requirements and how to move quickly from one end of the value proposition to another. But I think the most critical for me was to convince all of the engineers to work like that, because they were pretty much embedded in their way of working. But now we're there, and I have to say we're doing more and more projects in an agile way, from an agile design to an agile execution to even an agile deployment. And it definitely has benefits. But also not all projects are eligible for an agile approach, but more and more are, and especially the ones where consumer involvement is critical. I think there's a lot of value in working agile there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Right, the questions are coming in while we're talking, so bear with me while I read this one. So Ian Abraham, so you know which Ian we're talking about, says, Peter, good illustration of how many connection points there are for a typical fuel retailer. Do you see that newer devices are required on site to enable this, or are there ways to retrofit some technology and interact and get data from older devices? That's a question we've all like to ask Peter.
Well, the way we try to do it is we actually see that point of sale as a central point where we're going to collect the data. So when we provide these interfaces, especially on-site, so if you're looking at the on-site infrastructure, both on the forecourt side, but also in the C-store, we're trying to collect all of that data inside the point of sale system, and then basically as a whole bring that data outside. So first it's coming into central systems, and then from those central systems, we're sending it through files to anybody who wants it, whether that is a head office supplier, whether it's the ERP system. So we're bringing the data to a central point, and that also allows us, and I think that's a critical one, is that you can see the events and alarms that are emanating from all of these systems. And that we can use to actually improve the consumer experience later on, because we can see where it goes wrong. We can also see where it goes right. But more and more, what I'm seeing now is that people like what Greg also said in his presentation is just give us the data. And with that data, we'll do our own data mining and we'll take our own actions. And both of those are possible. We do like to bring it centrally into one location, which is a point of sale, and then bringing it as a whole to a central repository. Okay.
Right, well, I think I will now end your torture, let you go. Thank you very much. You've had some hugely positive comments in the box. It's been really interesting. Oh, yeah, Stephen Bosner says applause. So I'm applauding you. I will now just remind people that this is the end of this morning's session for the conference. But please don't forget that coming up at 2 o'clock CET, which is 1 o'clock GMT, we have what I'm sure will be a very entertaining session, because if any of you know John Carrier and David Ezel, you'll know that there will be plenty of chat going on. They're going to give us a tour of the open retailing tools and GitLab. And then immediately after that, we have Nick Allen and Mirko Spagnolati. Sorry, Mirko, I knew I'd murder it on one of these occasions. They're the new IFSF Executive Committee representatives for Technical Associates. So I would say pretty much anyone who's not a fuel retailer, please do go to that session and talk to them about what IFSF can do for you going forwards. Okay, so you now have a 2 hours 15 minutes break, which is our time zone friendly lunch break, and I look forward to seeing you back in just over 2 hours. Thank you very much.